Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well for IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well.
Glad to
And
hear it. Glad to hear it.
yeah, and today we're going to be talking about the working class and what the working class is like in the 21st century. Is there a
Yes.
working class in the 21st
Yes.
century?
Yes. I
It's
think
worth
it's a
discussing.
really, really good question.
Mm,
Because, like, first of all, working class is a word now that I would say is used in a negative way, or it has potentially negative connotations. Like, even more than that, I think it's just uncool. So people don't want to use the word. It relates
mm,
to something that was like 150 years ago, or it's like reserved only for blue collar workers, or
mm,
people that work in mines or factories or on construction sites or something cliched like that. And so, like, it has been absolutely degraded to a point at which it only serves a very, very small part of the population. And I
mm,
think that is ultimately a ploy and a really, really good, an amazing tactic of class warfare. And so,
mm,
like, there is this diminished, completely obliterated, I would say, understanding of what the working class is, for one. And then, like, the use of the word is just kind of like, it's not taboo, but like, it's reserved for another time. It's a historical term, which kind of, yeah, it just destroys class consciousness, which is really important if you have like a economic elite, or like some type of a ruling class.
mm,
If you disable the majority of people from being able to like describe themselves, as some type of group with connections, like a unified
mm.
group of people, then you disarm them from being able to organize and oppose you in any meaningful way. So I think in the 21st century, the idea of working class is effectively dead. And like, that's what I want to kind of unpack today in terms of what the
Mm.
ramifications of that means for all of us.
Yeah, because like even if you talk about the classic Karl Marx talking points of the proletariat and the working class, and the discussion between the antagonism between the employer and the employee, and exploitation and all of that.
Yeah.
um, if you put it in a 21st century setting, you then go into what Eric Olin Wright discusses in How to Be an Anti-Capitalist in the 21st Century. And
Yeah.
one of the first things he goes for is, well, the thing is, you can't really apply 19th century theory
Mm.
to the 21st century economy. And one of the
Yeah.
very first things he talks about is that if you do use Karl Marx's talking points, one of
Mm.
the very first roadblocks you go into is what he calls is like uh, the the mixed it's like the mixed economy that we kind of lived in, and also the mixes of different classes. And what he means by that is, well, say for example a point in the Communist Manifesto which talks about expropriating property from the capitalists.
Yeah.
Now if you were to say that to uh, somebody that would be associated to our what we would consider working class. So, say for example, you said that to a tradie. The
Mm.
very first thing they would say is, "Oh, wait, hold on there. I have not only do I have my own personal property, a property that I live in, but also I've got all these investment properties. What, you want to take that away from me?
Yeah.
What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" And like, again, like, if you try and use stuff that was used a couple of centuries ago and try to apply it,
Mm.
it's basically anyone that wants to turn like propaganda against you, it's very easy for them to do that
Yeah.
because, well, there's it's a very different time.
Yeah, that's fine. Like, and I get that like these are outdated terms. But like they're outdated, I think, foremost because of class warfare, because there is a
Mm,
very conscious and organized elite group of people that kind of control not only, the means of production, if I can use another outdated term. So basically all of the
mm,
productive elements of society, all the things that account towards national GDP for modern day talk. It's not only that they're organized in that sense, like they economically rule, but they also control the conversation completely because they're the
yeah.
same types of people that control the media. And they're types of people that control, like, effectively what happens in government or the deep state, kind of thing. So they're able to effectively shut down, like, grassroots organizations or like the union movement or labor organization,
Mm,
and because they've been able to successfully witch hunt these types of institutions you know, over the last 100 or more years, but like let's say even more specifically since the rise of neoliberalism, because they've
yeah.
effectively turned those things into like these extinct forms of social organization.
Mm,
The terminology that goes with it is also extinct and now reserved for the past or very few or select group in society. It's like kind of this exclusive men's club kind of word. But like the working class, I don't think deserves to be like as a word or a phrase. It doesn't deserve to have that position. Like it's still very poignant today. It's more
mm,
and more poignant as like we develop more and more as a capitalist society. Like if you look at the origins of capitalism, like if you could point to like kind of the main tenets of capitalism, everyone thinks of it kind of like in an economic or a monetary sense. Like, it's got to do with, the circulation of money and like investing capital in something to bring out more capital. But like if
mm,
you look at it from like a social relations point of view, like one of the main tenets of capitalism was the creation of wage labor.
yes.
So, like, wage labor, it's not like it didn't exist before capitalism. Like, it was a thing. Like, there's been many types of wage worker throughout history.
Yes.
But in order for capitalism to kind of create the conditions for its takeover, then like people had to be pushed into wage work more and more. And like,
Mm,
Marx in Das Kapital Volume 1, like goes to great lengths to explain kind of how wage workers were kind of forced into that type of occupation or that type
mm,
of means of labor since like the 1300s or something like that, as people were slowly in like Europe, especially, or yeah, well, in the European slash the Western countries of the world, were like displaced off the
mm,
land. They were living in feudal arrangements with communal property relations. Obviously, they had to serve like an upper class, like a feudal lord
mm,
or the clergy or whatever. But like they had a very different kind of labor existence. They lived off the
mm,
land and like, they were taxed on the fruits of their labor, but it was done collectively and on communal property. And like as like the communal lands were kind of handed over to private
mm,
ownership, people
yeah.
were displaced from the places that they could survive on, and like they were forced into wage labor. They were forced into having to sell their labor to the highest bidder. And like the more that increased, the other part about like capitalism, which is like, I guess, forgotten or rarely
Mm,
talked about these days, is that it's kind of the transition then. If wage labor is the creation and it's about pulling people off the land,
mm,
then wage labor is the creation of societies built around an urban environment because that's where
yeah.
most of the wage work is. So you have people being pulled out of rural living and into an urban environment. And in the urban
Yeah.
environment, the only way to make ends meet, unless you're the owner of capital
Mm,
or you own property that you can rent out to people, like you own things that make you money, you have to sell yourself
mm,
for money. And so if you look at that, like fundamentally, nothing's changed in that regard.
Yes.
Most people sell their time to the highest bidder or to their employer of choice, you
Yeah.
know, in some fantastic world, their employer of choice. And then that's kind of the way the world works now. Like there is still no difference fundamentally there. So that means there is still a mass section of society that is working class. Whether you want to use that word or make one up, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they're still the working class and they still exist here in the 21st century. The difference is they have no consciousness or they
Yes.
reject their consciousness because of all the years of propaganda.
Yeah, which is probably more to your point that I find that people tend to use working people a lot more than working class.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
really it's serving fundamentally the same
It's the same
process.
thing.
But also what I will say as well is that just to clarify what I was saying before is that when I say you go to the tradie and they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I would say that that is outdated in a prima facie sort of sense, as in
Mm,
when you look at it on the surface, it seems like it's an outdated term,
mm,
but I would say that you could probably make an argument that the pendulum is swinging back in favor of talking in that sort of manner.
yeah,
And I can't speak for anywhere else in society, but definitely in Australia, I think this is a very poignant topic, and that is housing.
mm,
So,
mm,
just to kind of broadly go of it in a broad stroke for the viewers and the listeners, yeah, just like housing, starting all the way back in the 90s with Howard, with the introduction of, the capital gains and also negative gearing and all of that. And like that sort of start of that process where suddenly you had people that not only were incentivized to have their own personal property, so one to live in, but then to have a nest egg, to go to their accountant and be like, hey, crunch a few numbers and lower my tax for me so I get a benefit from that. And if suddenly property developers come in and you also have your typical middle class or people wanting to get an investment property, suddenly you're thrown into a scenario that we're experiencing right now where the current younger generations, so your generation Z and onwards from now, they're just locked out of the property scene. And
yeah,
suddenly what might have worked for the boomers, Generation X, millennials, but that's debatable whether it works for millennials. Um, if suddenly you're locked out of this situation and it doesn't benefit you anymore, then that kind of Adam Smith capitalism works for everyone's self-interest. Suddenly, that doesn't necessarily work for your society. And
yeah.
look, I can't say that this will eventuate in people developing class consciousness again, but
No, but I
the
would
I,
say it does. I
okay,
would say it
well,
does because that sort of stuff is the exact type of thing that makes working class consciousness because it is working people at the end of the day, these, young people that either have to turn to the boomer parents that they have with their hands out and say, well, can mummy and daddy, can you pay for my rent slash, buy me a house because I can't afford the ability to do so,
mm,
even if I do have a well-paying job or if I've got a little trust fund or something like that. Um, or it the people that don't have that luxury, it locking them out of the housing market and stealing what is ostensibly known here as the Australian dream, as you've painted. Kind
mm,
of this has been built up as this thing to invest in, and it's safe and will provide for you in
mm,
your later years, all that sort of stuff, locking people outside of the Australian dream, which is like a kind of capitalist slash consumerist fantasy in and of
mm.
itself, because it's related just to market dynamics, really. Um, Trapping people outside of that pisses them off. And it's
Mm.
only really, like, let's be honest, at the end of the day, if you really want to look at the metrics of a revolution or, of societal unrest, it just comes down to how pissed off people get at the system and the status quo. So if the status quo is out of, equilibrium with the wants and the needs of the people, that's when people start to develop some form of consciousness. And like
Mm.
that could translate into working class consciousness, because if you were able to affiliate with other people that are also struggling because of the shortcomings of the market society and the capitalist
Mm.
form of, mode of living that we're all subjected to, if they are able to, form affiliations amongst one another, and they say, yeah, I'm also pissed off about that, and like I've also got this issue, and you're like, yeah, that's unjust, that's unfair too, then people will start to rediscover, I would hope,
Mm.
that they are, as a majority or as a mass group of people, all suffering from the same ailment, which is kind of this market society and capitalist way of doing things. And like, in recognizing that there is a shared enemy, then
Mm.
they will unify and rally together for the sake of making that change. It's just whether that realization leads to anything more than the just fighting over one issue like housing or
Mm.
something like that. It needs to develop into um, like a political organization as
Mm.
well as kind of the economic struggle. So the economic struggle in this case would be, forming grassroots organizations that like
Mm.
tackle housing problems, and call for systematic changes in order to deliver housing to the working class or sections of the working class that can't support themselves.
Mm.
And then the political struggle would be, joining a political party that aligns with those kind of values in order to deliver you through legislative changes and political changes and stuff like that, delivers you what you're looking for. And
Mm.
those are the two main elements in class consciousness, and this understanding that you are part of a working class. Now, that's really important. Like, don't get
Mm.
me wrong, but like in the neoliberal age, I would say that class consciousness is not just about what happens to one nation's people.
Mm.
It is something that has implications across the global community. Because
Yes.
like I was saying before, there's like kind of this understanding that like, all right, so working class is kind of resided to, people that like work in a factory or something like
Yeah.
that, or, people that like clean the toilets in like an institution or
Mm.
something like that. But let's go with like workers in a factory, that example. Now, most people don't affiliate with the working class because in
Mm.
the developed nations, and this is a direct result of neoliberalism, a lot of that industrial labor, the stuff that like, was really militant, like after the end of or before the world wars and then after the world
Mm.
wars, all of that stuff was like outsourced or offshored to like
Mm.
places like China on the Far East, or like, South American countries, or places where labor was really, really cheap. And so like big companies and corporations were like, screw dealing with unions and providing people with like, good working conditions and like an adequate wage to survive off and all that sort of stuff. And they shipped all of their production
Mm.
offshore, like basically or effectively undermining the working class. Now, some people could just say, "Oh, yeah, well, that was just coincidental," but like I would
Mm.
say that that was a conscious chessboard move
Yeah.
on the battle scene that is known as class warfare. And they were like, not only does this, get us more money, but
Yeah.
like this also will fix the problem that you have a very militant and organized working class
Mm.
in your backyard. And how do you derail that movement? By like just making them redundant and shipping their jobs offshore. And then like there became this massive like conversation about like upskilling or changing your job and your capacity and re-educating yourself, and moving into the service economy only and all this sort of stuff, because industrial labor doesn't
Mm.
really exist anymore. But like, you still got an iPhone. It's just made by someone in bloody China or something like that now.
Okay, I'm really glad you brought this up because I think bringing up unions and bringing up how working class used to be, that's a really good point to raise because what is considered working people in the 21st century
Mm.
is completely different from what it was in the 19th and the 20th century. So in the 19th and the 20th century, it would have been a factory worker. And the
Mm.
thing is, when you kind of have those clear lines, then it's easy for the workers to come together and, hold the picket line, do all these things because, you have that militant group, as you were saying. But the thing is, the average worker that you think about in the 21st century would be like a white collared office job.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, look, this is probably an anecdote from a previous workplace that I worked at, and like all of the people in my place of work, they didn't know about the union that was affiliated with us, and like I let my employer know that hey, that I was sharing this information with everyone else. They were fine with it, but I very distinctly got the phrase from the employer and the management. It was like, "Oh yeah, you can do that if you want, but we don't really deal with unions here." Like, and they also the people that I was sharing that information with, um, well, I wouldn't. They knew the concept of a union, but they didn't necessarily know what a union was, and
Yeah.
they just seemed incredibly ill-informed. And and basically, to my point, is that your office worker, oh, I'm not a nurse, I'm not
Yeah.
a fireman, I'm
Or a
not
teacher
a
or
yeah, I'm not a teacher.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not part of these. Like, having said that, I'm like there are workplaces, industries that are still quite militant,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or
but
they're at least unionized. I wouldn't even call them militant anymore. Like they're
yes.
very bureaucratic, don't you reckon?
Well, look, if we're taking the Australian example, you're probably right in the sense of, well, probably the CFMU is much more militant
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
than probably the teachers' unions that are here in Australia.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if you're going to compare them to the 1920s, which will refer to the Red Years, where like
yeah,
in
yeah,
Italy they basically took control of the means of production,
yeah,
and
yeah,
Britain they nearly threw over,
yeah. Yeah, that's
the
militant.
yes, like probably if you were to compare that, then we'll know.
Hmm.
But but yeah, I guess this is a bit of a tangent, but I guess more to my point is that the typical office worker would be like, union, why do I need that?
Yeah.
Compared to the factory workers back then, which if the employer could pay them a few less pennies,
Hmm.
then they would do that, and
Yeah,
then they
yeah,
would be like, no, I'm not standing for this,
yeah.
guys, let's all go on strike.
Yeah, yeah. And like that was like kind of it was actually almost the reverse of this logic that you're talking about here, where it was just like, oh, back then it would have been like, oh, you're not part of the union,
Hmm.
like kind
Yeah.
of thing. Like, and then you can't be trusted because like, well, what else are you hiding? Slash, what's your real agenda? Are you like an informant or something like that? Or are you against the working class as a sector of society? And like there was this understanding of where you kind of fit in the food chain.
Yes, yes. Just for everyone as well, I'll make a book recommendation. Look up Oil by Upton Sinclair, because in that book, it was around this period of the turn to the 20th century, and like in it, he discusses about Jurgis, who's basically this the foreigner that becomes part of the union, and when he is in the meat packing industries and he's like doing his thing, everyone was like full on encouraging him to join his union. And if you weren't part of the union, you were basically a scab and
Yeah,
worked for the
yeah,
employer.
yeah.
And like it, yeah, like very, very militant to compare it to what it is nowadays.
Yeah, and like militant in not just even just the organizational sense. Like these people kind of had like a hatred for like capitalists slash their employers because they knew they knew like the understanding that wage labor is trading your time for a price. And so
Mm,
they understood what that means fundamentally. Like here,
mm,
it's like today, it's just a given. Oh yeah, you get a job and like you get paid for your time. But before, it was like this understanding, especially like a couple of hundred years ago, when people were closer to being torn off the land, or if they weren't
mm,
being torn off the land, they may have previously worked for themselves, like as an artisan or part of a guild, or as like a petty bourgeois shop owner, or like a craftsman or something like that. And
mm,
so they saw the independence of labor. So, like working for yourself and creating something that you value and then you sell and put on the market
mm,
autonomously, they understood the value in that. So, when they were torn away from, being the owners of their own means of producing things and having
mm,
to like just sell their labor to the highest bidder, to produce things for them, they understood that relationship for what it was, which is okay, I'll sell you 8 hours of my time and you'll take all the benefits. Now, if you
mm,
say that to people nowadays, they like kind of scoff at it and laugh at you like, oh, well, they take all the risk. The business owner does all the hard work and all that sort of stuff. So, like, they
mm,
deserve all the profits of the company because, they took on all the risk, 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 risk. Like it's this big kind of like warped perception that just because you own something that you're entitled to everything. But like there's this fundamental detachment of the understanding that
mm,
it's not, if just because you own a business or you sit on the board of directors or something like that doesn't entitle you to everything. Because like if you
mm,
rely on 100 people to make something for you or provide the service that you profit from, then like these people knew 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and up until more recently, or let's just
mm,
say, they knew that if you were one of the 100 people creating something, it was actually you that was creating the value. Like it was just owned by someone else. Like the tools that you were using was owned by something else, or the resources that you were
mm,
manipulating were owned by something else, but you did the work. Like, and like tearing that away from me just because you paid me an hourly rate for it doesn't
mm,
make it okay. It doesn't diminish the fact that I'm doing all the stuff that actually adds value to this company while I'm just being overseen by some like managerial type, and their employers slash the owners of the business who just reap all of the rewards. They understood
mm,
that dichotomy, and so they hated. There was a level of hatred and um, despise for that system. But that despise and that hatred is all gone now, and it's actually taken completely in the reverse, where people kind of idolize the business owner, the employee, even if they're subject to the fact that they're being exploited by them. There was a fundamental understanding that this system was exploitative. And that's
well,
completely gone now. And like from that
uh,
hatred, people used to do just more things than just like organize and go on a picket line. There was this idea of sabotage. Like if your boss was pissing you off and like being
mm,
unjust, you wouldn't just be like, there's not just one kind of play in the playbook here where like, okay, let's all just go on a strike or something like that. Like, have you ever heard the saying, throw a spanner in the works? Well, like
mm,
they would literally sabotage the industry because they were just
mm,
like, well, we're not going to pay for this. Like the owner's going to have to shut down operation for a little while and they're going to lose profit. But people were
mm,
willing to make that sacrifice. They were like, yeah, okay, I might not get paid for the next couple of days, but you know what? Take that, evil employer. We just shut down your production line for a little bit. And they knew that hit the pocket of the business owner heavier, then they would probably feel the pain and the pinch of that. And so they were happy to lose things in the short term to try and keep up that antagonism and to keep up that idea that it's us versus them.
yes, because really, in the time that you're kind of describing in comparison to now, is that, well, in that time, there was a very clear distinction between the employee and the employer. And you can kind of have that militancy because of how clear it is. But I would say you did use a word before, manager.
Yeah.
See, with nowadays, uh, really rising through the ranks, if you will, within an organization, it's far more easier in comparison to probably back then.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
the workers knew their place knew their place
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
much as an employer or the managers did. But like nowadays, well, it's an aspiration basically to become
Mm,
a manager,
yeah.
and because and it's an aspiration to get paid more because then you can, I guess, consume more
You
within
can
our
consume more.
society.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I think that might have also been a fundamental switch of, instead of being a worker and if you wanted to be a radical, um, you know, collectivize with your other workers and form a cooperative,
Mm,
compared to now it's, hey, isn't it great that you're being employed by an employer, and let's see how much they let you have
yeah.
for their good grace.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all from their good grace, which before it
Mm,
was kind of like, no, they're exploiting you for your labor, for your time, your effort, your whether you're like producing things of value in a factory or you're in a service industry, it doesn't matter. You are creating the value or putting in the hard work that feeds their profits.
mm,
And yeah, they might reinvest some of it in the machine and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, they would be nothing without you. And there was this complete understanding that they are nothing without their workers. And so
mm,
there is a well-defined power balance there,
mm,
that not only is it that the worker needs the employer, but it is equally the employer needs the employee. Now, there is this fundamental kind of understanding today, like this kind of just accepted common sense, that it is the workers that are lucky to have the businesses there. Like,
mm,
economics plans and like policy decisions across the globe are based around this idea of job creation and, stimulating the business sector, because, they give out like, just altruistically give out all these jobs because they're just, wanting to be there to kind of help the people out, and, and give us all of these, the fruits of their labor slash, the scraps from their table kind of thing. But like, they're doing it
yeah.
because they're just wonderful people. And without the business community there, just helping us all out by giving us a job because they're just wonderful people, the worker, the average worker, or you, the average Joe kind of thing, would be nothing. So yeah, thank them and find yourself lucky to even have work in the first place.
Okay, I this has just occurred to me, but I think this is a fundamental thing that probably happened at the start of the 1960s, leading into neoliberalism and going on from then on, is that I think your typical employers and also um, yeah, your typical employers during that period, I think they actually did learn from the labor movement
Yeah,
from those periods where what they saw is how militant unions were and at least labor was, and they looked and they're like, huh, actually, I think these people um, have got a good point here. Maybe if us employers collectivize and do things for our own benefit, that's the reason why you have a business council here, or a employers council or representative here. And I think that's when, like, it's probably was less mobilized before the start of neoliberalism, but I just think it just got ramped up due to neoliberalism, that employers as well as big companies started to speak in the ear of politicians and started to mobilize and um, collectivize themselves,
yeah, yeah,
to kind of
yeah,
take those lessons from the labor movement to basically make economies work for them.
Yeah.
Because really, whenever you hear politicians nowadays, they always say two things: jobs and growth, jobs and
Jobs
growth,
and growth. Jobs and
jobs
growth.
and growth. And
Mm.
really, at the end of the day, um, sure, that might help a small business owner, but really, all of that growth is feeding into the machine that helps the employer rather than the employee.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever you hear them with their political rhetoric, talking about like they've just cut a deal or secured the creation of jobs because of some new industry that's going to move in, or some big companies coming in to save the day. They're always like, oh, it's going to create thousands of jobs, or it's going to create like all of these jobs and stuff, but like they never quantify really what that is. And if they do quantify the number of jobs that is being created and stuff like that, they never specify where those jobs are going, / follow it up with actually some investigation of whether that was delivered. Like so many times you'll hear this kind of rhetoric coming out of politicians and stuff who are in league with the business community. They're usually kind of people
Mm,
that are associated with like right wing kind of parties, or if they're on the left, they're like generally part of the market economy anyway. And so, like, when they say jobs to their supporter base, oh, we've just created all these jobs kind of things, really that just means that, like, they're subsidizing some industry, or they're bringing some industry in
mm,
that's really just going to reap the benefits of like some type of monopolistic control
mm,
over whatever industry or sector or resource that is. But like they sell it to the people by saying we're creating jobs. And like, aren't you so lucky, you plebs, that there are people like us out there in government and like, are cutting deals with the business community to keep you guys alive, kind of thing. And like that's all that rhetoric like really means. And like you raised something really important before about like how there's this kind of like collectivization amongst like economic elites and the
mm,
business classes, and like massive corporations and companies and things like that. And it's like something that like Chomsky talks about, like, and articulates it so well, is like, yes, there is class consciousness out there, but it's not the class consciousness we're talking about reviving here. The class consciousness is the people that like rule like the economies of the world and stuff like that.
mm,
They are very class conscious, and they know how to mobilize like the global economy and like governments around the world to work in their interest and make policy in their interest
mm,
and make sure their profits are maintained and
mm,
and driven up higher, and then also like their contribution to the actual like national economy and stuff like
yeah.
that is like diminished by way of making sure tax policies work for them, and like they don't have to contribute any more than they really should. They don't have to pay as many royalties or anything like that. Or when they decide to kind of outsource their services like overseas because labor's cheaper over there, they're able to do that
Mm,
through trade deals and things like that without ever having to pay the consequences and publicizing that to the people. They're able to
mm,
get away with these things like just like there's just no restrictions on them almost. And that is class consciousness, but it's class consciousness for them. They know
mm,
exactly what it is. And I think you're right. They've learned their lessons from the labor movements post
yeah.
World War and stuff like that. And like that comes from what I was talking about before, is like basically in the most advanced industrial nations of the world at the time, the Western powers, and maybe, some of
Mm,
like the Asian powers and stuff like that, is kind of displacing your own working class first and getting rid of the people that were the most organized and were basically a force to be reckoned with. So like when you had something like the New Deal going on, it was like
mm,
this coming together of the business community and the working class through like the trade unions and all that sort of stuff, cutting
mm,
deals while being oversaw by the state. Like as a business community, as a class conscious entity in society, if you have to cut deals with the unions to make your economic plans work, and like that's overseen by the state to like kind of deliver on that plan, then like you're still really like hindered there. You have to kind of come to the table and negotiate with them.
yeah.
What's better than that? just get rid of that element of society altogether, completely diminish in people's um, minds the idea that they should band together and fight for their own class interests, and just
Mm.
eradicate that understanding altogether. Not just eradicate them physically, you eradicate that from everybody's mindset.
But also to kind of tacked on there a little bit with what you were talking about with the New Deal is that, well, FDR, like that was the whole reason why he did the New Deal, is because if he didn't do that, um the American unions, the cooperatives, everyone in the labor movement within after the Great Depression, um they were ready to start a revolution.
Yeah, like apparently they like he rounded up like the business community or the capitalists and all that sort of stuff at the time. It was just like, look, guys, pull your head in here. Like, have you looked out the window? Like these people are ready to like eat you alive. If you don't give them something to work with here, I don't know if I can save you, kind of thing. Like it will take like there'll be no National Guard that can step in and try and save you. Um, you guys are next on the chopping block, kind of thing. And they're like,
Well, Well, yeah, it would have been the basis of what we thought Eat the Rich would have been if
yeah, yeah.
FDR didn't do anything.
Yeah, yeah. So like that is this that though in itself is like this clear and very profound acknowledgement of the capacity of working people to be not only like a political organization and like have political aspirations through that kind of democratic system, but also just their sheer weight of numbers and ability to mobilize themselves to fight for causes that they think are
Mm,
necessary. And like I said, like that is dangerous for a business elite. And so like what's the best thing to do is not only just offshore those services so they don't have that work anymore and that kind of that affinity,
mm,
but then also through years of propaganda and like things like the Red Scare, you associate working class movements and unions with like evil communism. So like
mm,
nowadays, like you were saying, when you talk to the average like office worker or something like that and say, oh, like, have you ever thought about being part of a union? They just like look at you and they're like, union? But like, what would they do for me, kind of thing. And
mm,
like it invokes uh, fear of the unknown or fear of something that like they've been programmed to be scared of. Like, oh, isn't that associated with like scary communism or like something
mm.
radical like that?
Actually, I would say it's far worse. I wouldn't say it's fear. I would say probably with the Red Scare and everything the Americans did post-war to do away with communism and socialism. I would say it's far worse. If you speak to your average worker, they would have ambivalence. They would be like, yeah, why would I do that?
Mm,
And then if you try to press it, they'll be like, stop wasting my time, and then just walk away.
yeah, yeah,
Because really, if you invoke anger or at least concern, that's something for you to work with.
yeah,
But if
yeah,
it's ambivalence
yeah.
and indifference,
Yeah.
there's not much you can do with that.
No, no. Apathy is like this is a huge problem in the 21st century, and that like extends from everything to like political apathy. People just don't care about politics because like they've been desensitized to it, and it's too complicated for them, or like they just don't want to be a part of that process because maybe it's boring. But like it extends into all these types of facets of social life, which is like, oh, why would I want to be involved with a whole group of people, like pay a fee to them, like I could buy a sandwich with that, or buy lunch with that every week, and then like am I going to have to do something too? Does that mean like if they call for a strike or call for some type of action, I'm going to have to go and vote on something and spend my time on that? Like do I really want to do all of those things? Like
Mm,
what's the benefit behind that? But like lo and behold, do they not realize that the fact that they never had to work as a child, or their children don't have to be forced into labor and stuff like that, is the direct result of like activities of unions. The fact that there is like
mm,
a minimum wage, or there's like an 8-hour working day, or like they have overtime and like holidays, or if they get pregnant they can go on maternity leave, or they can take leave
mm,
in their paternal paternity sense. Like, all of these sort of conditions didn't just
Mm.
fall out of the sky because, some kind of business council or like, some type of conservative think tank was like, we really should give the people some more better, like some better conditions and stuff like that. It came from like the struggles of
Mm.
working people. And so, like, if they associate it with that idea that they were also working people, like, not only would there be more wins on the board for like people in the working class,
Mm.
but like they might even be able to band together to enact some real change because they might actually be able to band together enough people to have political influence as well. And they'd
Mm.
like turn to existing like parties that have more of a left lean, let's say, and say, well, we've got like tens of thousands of people that are part of this union and stuff like that. And we'll tell them all who to vote for. But first, you make sure that you put this on your agenda for the next election. And then they start to
Mm.
get more and more wins for working people and stuff like that. But so, like, the fact that just the phrase or the idea of working class has lost all meaning and, like, more than that, has almost been eradicated from like the lexicon is like,
Mm.
it's a huge deal. And it's like, it's almost like the ultimate win in class warfare. Like, if
Yeah.
you have a group of people that like don't even know they're a group of people, right? They're a force to be reckoned
Mm.
with, slash, they even just have their own interests, then like you don't have to control anything. People just control themselves. Like, at least, like, slaves in ancient Egypt or something like that, they knew there were slaves.
Yeah.
Like, at least, like, serfs in like some type of feudal system, like, whether they accepted it or not, whatever, but at least they knew they were serfs. Like, they knew what was going on, like
Mm.
who they had to kind of report to, and like who was calling the shots, which kind of would say if they, lived a peaceful life or if they had to like go to war or something like that. Here in the 21st century, it's all about like kind of nationalism. So like, if you have to, sacrifice something, it's for the greater good and for the good of the nation.
Mm.
And like, if you are, having to work for someone else and like literally just sell yourself, which is what modern day wage work is, a form of slavery because you're selling your time to get money. If you have to sell yourself, then you're lucky to have that opportunity. That's the
Mm.
mindset we have today. So, like, why would there be this kind of understanding that there is a working class or there's like similar people that have similar struggles when like everyone's just is indoctrinated to believe that like this is the way things are, and more than that,
Mm.
we should be really grateful for this system.
Okay, this brings me to like one of the final points that I want to make, which is probably the last question that you see on the slide there, Mr. E.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
just with
interesting
everything
G
that you were
word.
talking, yeah, because with everything that you were talking with, we use gentrification as a way to describe a space or at least a neighborhood and that sort of thing. So, oh, it was a suburb that was housed a factory, and it was in the slums.
Yeah,
What
yeah, yeah.
was it?
Sort of working class
For,
housing.
yeah, and high crime rates and everything. But then, we've had some nice little developers come in, and
Mm.
they've made some swanky new
Yeah,
places, and
uplifted the
uh,
area.
yeah, they've spruiked it up, and suddenly it's become gentrified.
Mm. Mm.
Now, I want to use that concept. I'm not sure whether I fully believe it, but with everything that we were talking about, you could make a claim that the working class or working people in nowadays are a gentrified class in the
Yeah.
sense of, they possibly have higher wages, or at least they have aspirations of that middle class living where they just have enough and they can work their way up the ranks in
Mm.
their organization with their employer. But they're not like the old factory workers that used to be back in that time. They're spruced up.
Mm,
They're good for this new working age. Like, I'm not sure whether I'm fully sold on that sort of idea, but
mm.
I think it's interesting to have that idea of, well, can you say gentrification is for houses or at least neighborhoods? Can it be applied to a group of people that are not militant anymore?
Yeah, I think you can definitely say that. And I think that's kind of the point that I've been trying to make with this podcast episode is that because of kind of this warped sense that like especially obviously in developed nations because that's where gentrification really would happen the most, but in developed industrial societies you have this warped idea because like this kind of working class cliched activity of factory working and all that sort of stuff has been taken offshore and it's not in my backyard anymore, then like we're not like really working class in this society. There is no working class here because everyone's got like good,
Mm,
service jobs and managerial positions and positions in the intelligentsia or in high tech industries and all that sort of stuff. So we're just like more civilized and stuff like that. So that's like kind of the essence of gentrifying a suburb in terms of changing its built environment character. You change it and you gentrify it and you make it more classy, right? The average
mm,
worker in the advanced country, because they're not, at the coal face or something like
mm,
that, is more swanky now and they're more classy. And so, kind of this idea of like living in a slum or a like housing commission or a working class neighborhood is gone, and so is the idea of being working class is gone because it's not associated with that cliche blue
mm,
collar scenario. That's definitely the case. And I think that is a product largely of consumer culture. So, like,
mm,
obviously capitalism relies on having a class that, or a group of people, if not the whole society, that can just consume all the goods that it produces en masse. But, like, it's further than that. We are highly consumeristic and individualistic. So it's
mm,
all about like on an individual level, is that consumption is about keeping up with the Joneses and like living for that middle class aspiration of always wanting more. So if you have an individualistic mindset where you're just about like me getting more stuff and all that sort of and getting things in order to justify my existence and make me feel good about myself because it's driven by your consumer fantasies,
mm,
then like you don't need to have affiliations like class affiliations because it's all introspective. You're only thinking about like what's going to make you happy, and that's the pursuit of material things in a consumer
mm,
society. And in a gentrified kind of neighborhood, you have the same kind of stuff. You live in a really nice place, and like the old like contaminated land has been remediated and now it's been turned into a park where like the kids can run around and there's a bike path so I can go out on a Sunday in Lycra and pedal around and pick up a latte and all that sort of stuff.
mm,
Like the gentrification of a suburb is exactly kind of reflected in the gentrification of the working people. They
mm,
they leave behind their connection to the fact that they are a working person, and they think of themselves as an entity, like a sole trader almost, someone that only looks out for themselves and gets the best bargain from their employer because they're able to
mm,
get the best price for themselves and all this sort of stuff because they're an individual, and they don't need to have a union. What's a union going to do for me? What's class consciousness and collectivism going to do for me? Because I can make it on the world by myself and just consume the way that I like and live the ultimate middle class fantasy that I've always desired. I don't need to be associated with other working people because I can fend for myself. This individualistic kind of ideology
mm,
that is just created and then compounded by consumerism definitely gentrifies the the working class in an advanced nation, and the fact that they don't have to stare at like actual or like cliched working class people anymore. They think that it just doesn't exist, and it's even a stupid notion. to believe that the working
Mm.
class still exists in the 21st century. And so they turn their nose up at it, which is exactly what gentrification does in neighborhoods. You have the
Mm.
original population that lives in there, and then the people that come in and replace them. They might even still mix. That's definitely part of gentrification, where you kind of you do it nicely with a salt and pepper mix, where you keep the original occupants and inhabitants in there and mix them with like people from a higher socioeconomic background and all that sort of stuff. So everyone lives together in social harmony and all this sort of
Mm.
crap. But really, what we know from gentrification, like with what's happened in like Redfern and stuff like that, is like
Mm.
once the people, the newly the new occupants come in, they basically just complain about the old occupants until they are forced out by the police or like housing commissions and stuff like that. So you turn up your nose at working class people, or like the original inhabitants of a gentrified area, and they're gone in like a few years or in a generation.
Or you do raise a good point with Redfern. I'll bring up I'll bring up South Park here with the Soda Sopa stuff.
Yes, yes,
Yes, where they basically treated Kenny and his
yeah,
family as an exhibit,
yeah, yeah,
and really, it's a similar sort of vibe with the block,
yeah,
where people walk past it and it's like, oh, it's the famous
yeah,
place in Redfern.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's because like you do raise a good point where almost the people that are much more upper class in compared to
mm.
the working class people in the area, they treat certain spots as like almost a tourist
Yeah, yeah.
destination.
It's like a passing location, like a part of the what is it, the scenic tour on your way to work or your way to the cafe or something like that. It's looked
Mm,
down upon, which is exactly the way that like the, you know, like individuals look down at the idea of the working class today because it is
mm,
beneath them because they think they're better. But little do they know they are still working people. They're still
mm,
subject to the same laws and the same exploitation that was taking place 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. They've
mm,
just habituated and like become completely desensitized to the fact that they are modern day slaves.
mm,
They're exploited for their labor to somebody else's benefit. And even if they get paid a really good amount and can live in swanky kind of areas and like, afford, avocado on toast and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't make a difference. They're just seeing some of the superficial benefits of that more, and that paints over any of the real underlying issues with society. Because I can tell you, if capitalism has taught us anything, it's that sort of stuff doesn't last forever. What's on the tip of everyone's tongue, like globally at the moment, is a very working class issue: the cost of living,
mm.
inflation.
Yes.
Everybody knows it's going up. Everyone's complaining about it, and they feel like it's an individual problem. They treat it like, oh, woe is me. My interest rate's gone up. I can't afford to do that anymore because it's $10 more than it used to be, or something like that. But like,
Mm,
this is a class issue, and it's a product of class warfare. When the bank puts their interest rates up, they don't do that to put like a leash on the business community to make them kind of rope in like their costs and stuff like that to drive down spending and drive down like the cost of goods and stuff like that. They're just squeezing the middle
mm,
and the lower classes, so working people, to like reap more profits for the people that own the banks, really.
mm.
They've got no intention of like fixing inflation. It's a myth. It's a myth that
Yes.
was debunked long time ago, by our friend Keynes. Like, he figured that out with his Keynesian economics. Just because like you increase interest rates, people don't save money, which like leads to less inflation. That just
Mm,
cuts money out of circulation, which actually does
yes.
nothing. It does
Mm,
nothing to help inflation, because then people just stop spending, and like their money doesn't like do anything. It doesn't sit in the bank and then the bank goes, oh well, we've got all these things so we can start pumping it back into the economy because everyone's got their money in savings. It's boom. It's just absolute crap. all of this stuff, inflation, the cost of living, and the rise of all that stuff, which is affecting everyone, even the people that think they're swanky and they live in these gentrified neighborhoods and wouldn't associate with the working class, are affected by it, and they're feeling the burn of it. And so I hope like there is some reaction to this, and it does evolve into some form of consciousness. But I'm not going to
Okay.
hold my breath for us. I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why, at least at the start, I was at least cautious as to whether it would lead to something, because you can it feels like you're on the precipice of something,
Mm,
but it it could just go either way. You feel like there could just be a policy that's implemented that kind of solves the issue, and then we go back to the things that the way they are,
yeah.
or we things do stay the way they are in terms of cost of living, or at least here in Australia, the housing situation where we're locking an entire generation out of the market. Maybe that does cause something that is revolutionary. I don't know,
Mm.
but only time will tell, I guess, with these things.
Only time will tell for us. Only time will
But
tell.
with that, I think that's a good note to finish things. And last off, what's that synthwave art? So this week I went with the gentrification prompt, and I said the when the working class becomes gentrified, and it gave me that.
It's intense. It's really intense, and it's got that real industrial vibe to it. But you can see how it's kind of like hipster, chic, industrial.
Yeah, I didn't like. It seems like it's a fashion model, because
Yeah,
she's even got the jumpsuit and everything,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
uh look, all I'll say is, yeah, it looks like a fashion model that's cosplaying being a working class person.
Mm.
Yeah,
Nice allegory again for the allegory of your gentrified working class.
yeah. Okay, and with that, remember everyone to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much, 4AS. And to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.